In your text, you may not find the summary of all of the supplementation and ergogenic aid guidelines in the one section. What I've done is I've gone through the chapters and compiled the information so we could talk about it all at one time. The reason why we start talking about supplementation initially begins with inability to fuel our bodies in the proper way for performance when we're talking about fuel from food. One of the reasons is because of lack of education on how beneficial food is in our body, a lack of knowledge of the energy systems and what each food does for fuel, misinformation out there about our macronutrients, as we've talked about, but then also just hearing misinformation about supplements themselves. So when we're looking at a study that was done evaluating NCAA Division I schools and their athletes, specifically freshman football players, what they observed is 61% believed that protein is the main source of energy for working muscles. 71% disagreed that sports drinks are better than water for replacing fluid loss. 65% believe that vitamin and mineral supplements increase energy levels. So what we've learned in this course is for working muscles, protein is the last energy source that is to be used. We do have our various energy systems, and we can, in a small amount, use protein. But again, that is not our primary source. We need to rely on carbohydrate and fat intake to be able to spare the protein for rebuilding. When it comes to sports drinks versus water versus other beverages, sports drinks can be more beneficial because they may provide the carbohydrate and the electrolyte. That varies and depends on the type of sport as well as the duration of the event for this athlete. Finally, we also know that vitamins and minerals don't actually provide energy, meaning calories. They provide cofactors, coenzymes. They're part of those things that make up the energy processes in our bodies. In another study looking at, again, just kind of nutrition knowledge for athletes, this was mentioned that 29% of athletes correctly identified carbohydrate, 11.8% fat, and 3% protein when looking at percent of total calories. So if we have some misinformation about just our basic macronutrients, then we introduce all of our micronutrients, our vitamins and minerals, and then we introduce any dietary supplement or ergogenic aid that's out there, there's going to be a lot of confusion. To bring it back to chapter 1, you may have read this, go back in your memories and remember day 1 and see if this rings a bell to you. But again, dietary supplements are not regulated the same way as food and medication are regulated. The Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act that was passed in 1994 states that a vitamin, mineral, herb, botanical, amino acid, metabolite, constituent, extract, or combination of any of these ingredients can fall into that supplement, again, category, but it doesn't ensure its safety or effectiveness. The FDA doesn't require a supplement to be approved before it's marketed or sold. In fact, a product can go out on the shelves and be sold, and the only time it's required to be taken off the shelves is if people who have used that report that it has had a negative effect or impacted their health, and the FDA proves it's unsafe and adulterated, and then it's removed. So again, any of the supplements out there, they may claim different things, but they might not actually be effective with those claims, and they definitely cannot claim to prevent, diagnose, or cure. So we have to be very careful. We can't assume that because it's on the shelves in the store, in GNC, because various athletes have endorsed this, that it is actually effective for us. So when we think about supplement use, we can view that about 60% of elite athletes take supplements. some various reasons why, but about equal percentages for each show that health-related, to improve strength and power, to increase muscle gains, again, all relating back to increasing performance. Males specifically are looking for protein, maybe weight gain products, creatine, and other supplements geared at gaining muscle mass and burning fat. And again, this is just a broad statistic. There are males that aren't focused specifically on these outcomes or might, again, look for different products. Females generally looking at vitamins and minerals, weight loss supplements, energy enhancers. Again, this is the general observation from this survey. It's not an all-inclusive, so females may be looking for other supplements as well as the males. When we actually define ergogenic aid, we are talking about any substance or strategy that improves athletic performance. So it might be a supplement, as we just defined, but it might also include other things or other strategies. So an ergogenic aid might be something like clothing, sneakers, swim caps, things to make us more aerodynamic in the water, this certain swimsuit that we're wearing. Those are considered our mechanical ergogenic aids. They kind of change the function of our movement. If we're looking at psychological ergogenic aids, hypnosis or sports psychology or psychologists may be used to refocus the mind or encourage that athlete to be able to tune in during competition, maybe enhancing their performance. Nutritional aids, we're looking at protein supplements. Physiological aids, we're looking at things like blood doping, so actually changing the physiological occurrences in our body. And then pharmacological aids, we're looking at something like caffeine that can be used. Again, all of these used to achieve an improvement in athletic performance, but as I'm sure you can start to think about, some of these are a little bit more ethical choices or less controversial choices than others. We also want to think about legality in some of these things in terms of the type of athlete we are and the requirements for our league, our organization, whatever it might be. So we want to ask these few questions, regardless of what supplement, ergogenic aid, whatever it might be that we are talking about with an athlete. If we read an article, if we see an advertisement, we want to ask these same things. Is it legal? Can we find information that says this is a legal supplement, it is not against the law to take it? Is it ethical? So is this a choice that we can make that follows our ethics, that lines up with the standards set for us in the league, again, the sport, whatever it is that we are a part of in that way? Or does it feel ethical for us personally, as well as what are the guidelines of any various events we're participating in? Is it safe? Just what it says. Is it safe for our health? Is this going to harm us if we take it? Is it effective? Does this actually work? Maybe we can take it. Maybe it's legal. Maybe it's ethical. Maybe it's safe. But what if it causes no change in our performance? Is it worth taking? Is it pure? That's important because we don't want to consume a supplement that may have a banned substance in it. Because, again, if our athletes get drug tested or they're screened and a banned substance pops up, saying that we didn't know is not going to make that go away. Then finally, what's known about this supplement? Is it brand new? Is it something we just discovered and it's the latest trend? It's in all the magazines and on Dr. Oz? Or is this a well-researched, peer-reviewed supplement that we actually have evidence for? And I'm sure you can determine what we should be recommending to our athletes after looking at some of these things. The first thing that we're going to talk about that some athletes may use as a performance enhancement will refer to our carbohydrate intake. So I'm sure you've heard of carb loading. Essentially, another name for this would be glycogen supercompensation, meaning we're overcompensating and filling up and maximizing our glycogen stores. There's a few ways that this has been tried throughout the evolution of carb loading, I guess. But the main idea is that if we can maximize the stores or even go above that typical maximized storage form for us, that we can maintain our pace for longer amounts of times. If we're endurance athletes, we can again have that higher glycogen to lead us to increase our time to exhaustion. Carb loading has been shown to be effective for those who practice intense endurance training greater than 90 minutes, and that's important to note. Carb loading is not recommended across the board for any athlete. The reason why this works is because it can increase the activity of glycogen synthase with the endurance training. It allows our specific muscles that we use in training to have the loading or the supercompensation because of the increased activity of that enzyme. If we're doing some more short duration, maybe 20 to 30 minute runs, maybe up to 45-minute runs, this may not actually be beneficial because when we store more glycogen, we store more fluid. Our limbs may just feel heavier. They might be a little stiff because of that. And in a short duration activity where we wouldn't actually tap into that extra storage of glycogen, it wouldn't be beneficial and would actually kind of weigh us down. Another instance in where we may actually see carb loading is in bodybuilders if it's done closer to competition and used to increase muscle size and appearance. So this doesn't lead to a gain in strength, but again, if we're thinking about the storage of glycogen and the storage of water that goes along with that and kind of the bulking up look to increase, again, that appearance of the muscle size. So to review, if we are recommending carb loading, the most evidence shows that it would be beneficial for endurance athletes training over 90 minutes. Our initial kind of classic carb loading regimen is a 6-day time frame in which we would deplete our glycogen stores 6 days out. Basically, we would exercise. We would consume a low-carb, high-fat diet with exercise for 3 days, utilizing those stores and not sufficiently replacing them. We would then consume a high-carb diet for the next 3 days with rest. So we're resting, we're not using as much of those stores, but we're filling them up and overloading them. When we do this regimen, again, it's 6 days. We have to have 3 days of rest before competition. So a problem that may be occurring is that we have to taper our training too far out. Planning to do the 6-day change in our intake may be too cumbersome. And so we're looking at a revised method that may be a little bit more appropriate for our athletes and more realistic, I guess, for them. So again, we still want to taper training on consecutive days after our glycogen depleting exercise. So we're still looking at reducing training, increasing our intake. But we're doing a normal mixed diet on the first 3 days and then a high carbohydrate diet the last 3 days. We don't want to necessarily deplete those stores by limiting our carb intake and continuing to exercise in the way that's described in the classic carb loading. An example might be on day 1, we're going for 90 minutes. We're training at 70% of our VO2 max. And, we're having that mixed carbohydrate source. So it's not actually a low carbohydrate intake. It's maybe lower than what this athlete needs on a daily basis, but it's not low by any means. So this is where we're kind of getting our mixed source when we're looking at our grams per kilograms of 5 for days 1, 2, and 3. We see also that on day 2 and 3, this athlete can decrease the training to a shorter duration at the same intensity. When we get to day 4 and 5, we're still training, we're still tapering that down on same intensity, again, just less time doing that, smaller duration, and we're increasing our carbohydrate intake at this point to 10 grams to kilogram. Again, for this athlete, day 6 would be just one rest day, and then with competition the following day. So, some downsides to this is that glycogen storage occurs slowly. So it does take 2 to 6 days to super compensate. It's not something that occurs as rapidly as we may like. We need to plan for this. We need to actually practice this before putting it into effect for competition. Because if we do feel stiff, if we feel sick, if we just feel like our energy isn't there and our performance is low, then that's going to negatively impact our competition. Athletes also might not want to alter their training in that way right before competition. Again, that's why I always encourage practicing with something like this beforehand. When we are looking at our stores within 24 hours and kind of changing those stores and seeing what we can do at that point to have minimal disruption in training, that's something that we can see kind of coming down the road, and maybe some explanations and some shorter term carb loading that we can start recommending. Essentially, when we hear something about I'm trying to think, like a pasta dinner that maybe we did in high school before games, or maybe some teams are still doing that now, the idea is based on this carb loading principle that we want to super compensate our glycogen stores. And eating a pasta dinner may fill them if that's what we need, but it may not necessarily be classified as carb loading or have the same benefits as our carb loading protocol of those 2 to 6 days may have. And again, this is only going to be for our endurance athletes greater than 90 minutes of activity at a time, or our bodybuilders looking to bulk up more specifically. So moving on from kind of manipulating the macronutrient and our intake and our exercise to a little bit more specifics about supplementations. The first group we're going to talk about is going to be amino acids. There's a variety of supplements that we have read about, heard about, and so we're going to talk about the most common. And then at the end of these next few slides, we're just going to sum up what the most recent recommendations say about some of these. So beta-alanine is an amino acid supplement. It's found in protein foods. It claims that it is the rate-limiting step in our carnosine formation. Essentially, that is used to buffer our acid and help maintain pH so that we don't end up being fatigued from our acid balance being off. The dosage that has seen to be effective and safe is 6 grams of beta-alanine a day for 2 weeks, and then 4 grams a day. This has been shown to be effective in athletes performing high-intensity exercise. And again, that's key, those high-intensity exercises. When we're looking at our next supplement, HMB, or beta-hydroxymethylbutyrate, this is a metabolite of leucine, and it is theorized to minimize muscle protein breakdown. So the idea again behind this is if we're consuming this supplement, then we don't have as much protein breakdown, we can maximize synthesis. A safe dosage is going to be 3 grams per day into 3 1-gram doses. And what we're seeing is that in untrained individuals, it may show small increases in strength. I don't know if we have enough information for trained individuals. Again, this wouldn't be harmful, but to have that specific ergogenic aid and increase in muscle strength, we don't have that strong evidence exclusively. Where I have seen this utilized as well is in a hospital setting. If we have an elderly person that is in a hospital bed for a period of time, they may have to drink nutritional shakes like Ensure or something similar, and oftentimes that will have HMB added in to help prevent the breakdown of our muscle protein, since there is no stimulus for that to build back up. We don't want to have that rapid loss, or as rapid of a loss in those individuals who are not active and are bedridden. The next type of supplement that we have all heard about as well is going to be our branched chain amino acids, or our BCAAs, more specifically leucine, isoleucine, and valine. These are hypothesized to be able to be metabolized for energy during endurance exercise when our glycogen stores are low. So they compete with some similar receptors, so that when our glycogen is used up, the branched chain amino acids then adhere to the receptors and can be metabolized. So when these are competing with tryptophan, that's occurring when tryptophan is prevailing when our glycogen stores are low, leading to some mental fatigue. So it is theorized that if we increase the intake of our branched chain amino acids, our cells will be able to, our skeletal muscle will be able to use the branched chain amino acids for energy, maintaining and preserving some of the glycogen stores so we don't have that mental fatigue. The dosage that is recommended to be safe is 5 to 20 grams per day in divided doses throughout the day. When we're looking at the summary of the research, what we've seen is that this, although it makes a lot of sense and we can look at some diagrams and we can see exactly what's occurring, this hasn't been shown to actually be effective for improving performance. There may be some promise for improving immune support or improving post-exercise fatigue, but in terms of improving actual performance in various measures, there is no overwhelming evidence of that at this point. Continuing on with our amino acids, we're looking at glucosamine and chondroitin. We often hear about these with our joints, with arthritis, and essentially they are a joint lubricant, or glucosamine is a joint lubricant, and chondroitin can aid in the elasticity of cartilage. So if we keep our joints healthy, then as athletes, we can continue performing well. The safe dosages are 1,500 and 1,200 milligrams per day respectively, and it takes 8 weeks to see any results. Results that are seen is that this actually may not reduce joint pain or functionality in people with osteoarthritis, but results may vary. Again, not a lot of conclusive evidence on this being an effective ergogenic aid. When we're looking at glutamine, similar story. Glutamine is a fuel source for our immune system. After endurance exercise, our plasma concentration decreases. So the idea is that if we supplement glutamine, we'll maintain our immune system strength, and we may not have any risk for illness or immune system being compromised for exercise. Overall, to summarize, this is not proven to be effective as theorized. The dosage is 5 to 10 grams per day, up to 20 grams per day. It is safe at those doses. It is just not effective for being an ergogenic aid. When we are looking at some of our other amino acids known as our growth hormone releasers, like arginine, ornithine, or lysine, these may be effective for stimulating growth hormone release. Again, sending those signals that, hey, this growth hormone can be released, we can start building and we can start stimulating growth. But exercise does that in itself. So if we take these supplements prior to exercise, then they actually decrease the effectiveness of exercise as a stimulator for our growth hormone and are not effective for increasing muscle mass or strength, which is interesting. Again, the dosage is 5 to 9 grams per day. What I like to say about some of our amino acid supplements too is we may be getting a lot of those just in the protein foods that we are consuming, especially if they're a complete protein, especially if we're, really paying attention to that amino acid breakdown. When we're talking about our fat-related supplements, we typically think of some that will mobilize fat, help us lose weight, or be a fat itself and have some sort of performance effect. So when we're thinking about caffeine as an ergogenic aid, it's thought to improve performance, to delay fatigue, delay the perception of fatigue. It's a CNS stimulant, it's a central nervous system stimulant, and it may have heightened awareness. So it may allow us to just be more alert and awake and perceptive during our bout of exercise. The dosage that is typically recommended for an ergogenic aid is 2 to 3 milligrams per kilograms per day. What we're looking at is that caffeine does improve endurance performance in high intensity activities up to 20 minutes. So this is actually a mostly safe and effective ergogenic aid in the dosages recommended for endurance performance or high intensity activities. There's no direct effect on weight loss when we're looking at some of those studies. However, performance-wise, this may be helpful. And this is one that we often think of, or that's been talked about a little bit more recently in the media. Depending on limits on the amount of caffeine we can consume and the amount that can show up in our urine, we would have to consume a lot of caffeine very rapidly to screen high for caffeine in our urine, but it still remains possible and is just something to think about for some of our athletes. Carnitine, that's another one that we think about and transports our fatty acids to be made into energy. So the idea, again, is if we can mobilize more fatty acids and use that for energy, maybe we're sparing our glycogen, maybe we're using more of our fat for energy. Dosage at 2 to 4 grams per day is safe, but that hasn't shown to be effective in being, again, a performance enhancer. When we talk about medium chain triglycerides, so those are going to be our 6 to 10 carbon atom triglycerides. They're rapidly absorbed into the portal vein. They don't go through the lymph system. They're not packaged as our chylomicrons, such as our other longer chain fatty acids or triglycerides. And the idea, again, is that if they can quickly get absorbed and transported, maybe we're using those and sparing muscle glycogen. A dosage at 5 to 9 grams per day can be safe. However, this is not effective for this proposed mechanism, and it may impair performance, and you may have guessed it, because of GI distress. Sometimes with a higher intake of our medium chain triglycerides, we might have a negative effect on our bowel movements. If we're looking at omega-3s as a supplement for ergogenic aids, it is proposed to reduce inflammation, reduce oxidative stress, and counteract immune dysfunction. In these specific roles, and what was measured for 2.4 grams a day of omega-3, this was not shown to be effective. However, what we want to think about as well is, are we getting the amount of omega-3 that we need in a day for proper function? So if we're not, and we supplement and we're meeting the RDAs as recommended, then maybe that is beneficial for us. as with any of these, we kind of have to consider it on an individual basis. And at this point, although some of these aids have not necessarily been effective to enhance performance as we may have hoped that they would be, they all can be safe to take at these certain levels, or we may be taking them in anyway, and we don't realize it. So to talk about caffeine just a little bit more, I wanted to pull up this chart here, just showing the content of various foods with caffeine. So that might be our coffee, that might be an energy drink, that might be a soda. So the NCAA can test our post-competitive urine for our athletes, and anything that exceeds 15 micrograms per milliliter will lead to disqualification. So again, I said that's a lot of caffeine in a short amount of time. That's going to be 6 to 8 cups, so 8-ounce cups of coffee 2 to 3 hours prior to competition. 130-pound person, again, a typical amount of caffeine that may actually have an ergogenic aid effect may be 120 milligrams to 170 milligrams. To bring in some other supplements that are just in a more general category, or that we've talked about a little bit previously, protein, that's a common one. We often hear athletes talk about protein, and we've addressed this in our discussions. We see that whey protein can be more effective than casein for increasing muscle size and strength. That's why you see whey protein isolate a lot in a lot of protein supplements. The maximum dosage is 2.5 grams per kilogram per day. But again, what we want to think about is that's a maximum dosage for protein intake total in a day. So if this is protein powder, or if this is food and protein from food as a whole, we want to remember we don't necessarily want to exceed that 2.5 grams per kilogram per day. That would not have any additional benefits. For our vitamins and minerals, as we mentioned, if there's a deficiency, we can get that proven by symptoms or by lab work, and we want to correct that with supplementation as recommended, or we want to look at food and make sure that each person is consuming the right foods to meet their DRIs on a pretty regular basis. If somebody's getting what they need from food and they're supplementing a multivitamin, it's not likely that they're improving their athletic performance. Again, as we mentioned, athletes are more active. They may need to consume more energy from food, and then they get more vitamins when that occurs. So they may already be taking in more vitamins from food and don't need to then supplement. When we think of vitamin C or E, we think about those as our antioxidants. We might think of vitamin C to protect our immune system or to help with a cold. We really don't want to have excessive amounts of these because it's not beneficial and there could be potential toxicity effects. So we don't really want to go, again, above 2,000 milligrams per day for C and 1,000 milligrams per day for E. Quercetin is another supplement that is addressing our anti-inflammatory effects in athletes and looking at if this decreases inflammatory factors. Essentially, studies have shown that 1,000 milligrams a day for several weeks is not affecting in improving performance or preventing oxidative damage. But again, that's a safe dosage. If an athlete wanted to try something like this, there's no specific negative risk at this point of consuming that dosage. Chromium, this has been shown to not be effective in increasing muscle mass, decreasing body fat, and improving performance. That's one that's kind of been around a little bit more recently. And really, protein can be helpful if we can't get enough from food. Vitamins and minerals should be supplemented and can be helpful in improving performance if we have a deficiency. But otherwise, excess amounts of these things are not really beneficial like we might think. When we switch gears a little bit and we're looking at supplements that are unsafe and not effective, when we're looking at androstenedione, we can see that this is actually an unsafe supplement. The dosage is unknown because it is unsafe. Essentially, there's a short-term rise in testosterone when we take this supplement. However, there's no effect on muscle size, strength, or power. A side effect is that there can be increases in estradiol, which can result in the development of breasts in males. And again, essentially, this is unsafe, not effective, should not be recommended. When we're looking at DHEA as a supplement, this is one that the safety is kind of unknown. Again, there's not that necessarily recommended dosage by any means, but we want to, again, mention the effect as a performance enhancer. The DHEA is kind of known as a weak hormone, or kind of a precursor, and is not under the banned steroid act itself, but still doesn't seem to show effectiveness. When we're looking at ephedra or ephedrine-containing supplements, this is one that was on the market. It was effective in weight loss, and people were taking it, and it was flying off the shelves, and then people started having heart issues and actually dying from consuming these ephedrine containing supplements. So the FDA, these were reported, the FDA investigated, and they banned any of these products. And there's a safety concern for anything less than 10 milligrams and less in general. And we don't ever want to recommend those for our athletes. Finally, when we look at the most recent sports nutrition recommendations, we can see that there's a couple other types of supplement categories added in here. We see sports foods, as we've talked about, with our drinks, our bars, our gels, etc. These can be used and can be helpful for athletes, and are often used as convenience to provide certain benefits, such as some carbohydrate during exercise, for instance, and they are effective, but we want to caution athletes of using them inappropriately and really if unneeded. Medical supplements, again, those might be what we mentioned, our vitamins, our minerals, etc. Same recommendation goes, that we want to make sure that we have the evidence of needing this supplement, so of a deficiency or a low level of some of these, and we want to have the appropriate professional recommend these, whether our doctor or dietitian. We want to make sure that we're just not self-prescribing these. One thing to mention as well, and I believe that we talked about it previously, but when we mention creatine, this is where we think of that phosphocreatine system. So creatine can actually improve performance with repeated bouts of high-intensity exercise that have short recovery periods. Sound familiar? It has a direct effect on our competition performance and enhanced capacity for training. So yeah, it is an ergogenic effect. It does increase creatine and phosphocreatine concentrations. It may enhance glycogen stores. It may have a direct effect on muscle protein synthesis. Still looking at some of this. But again, there are some concerns in that there's some acute weight gain. So if it's a weight-sensitive sport, that might be of some concern. May cause GI discomfort. Some products might not have the appropriate amount of creatine. So we want to look for kind of a pure product that we, as with any product, want to have our coaching staff review, again, to make sure that it's not containing any banned substances. So we talked about caffeine. I'm going to move over on that one. For sodium bicarbonate, This is one that, again, will help with the acid-base balance and can be taken pre-exercise with an acute dose and increases extracellular buffering capacity. So it can improve performance because it may lessen the acidity that may occur that could lead to fatigue. Another side effect may be GI distress. Again, that just depends on the athlete. Beta-alanine we mentioned, and then finally nitrate. Nitrate has been shown to improve exercise tolerance and economy. It's been shown to improve performance in endurance athletes who are non-athletes. We want to increase our plasma nitrate concentrations to increase the production of nitric oxide, and this can come specifically from concentrated sources of food. One very popular lately, beetroot juice. This may be something that the athlete has to get an acquired taste for. Maybe something that could cause GI discomfort. Might have some difference in tolerance for those, but this is promising as well. Again, to kind of bring this full circle, there are so many supplements out there. The ones we touched on today, probably only the tip of the iceberg. However, those are the ones that tend to be most well researched and supported by evidence as being potentially ergogenic, actually showing evidence in improving performance or decreasing time to fatigue, or that we know do not increase performance and are not safe and effective. So it will be important to look through these and look through, I believe it is page 518 and 519 in the sports nutrition guidelines that are posted in Blackboard, and through these slides to identify what supplements you may actually recommend to clients looking at safety and efficacy and research. We want to pay attention to labels. I oftentimes will get athletes bringing in labels and say, is this an okay supplement to take? The first thing I want to look at is what it is, what it claims to do, and if there's any kind of red flags, any promises, any quick fixes. Typically, if it's something I haven't heard of, I might tell the athlete that I need to research it a bit more. Or if it's something that I've heard of that I know is not effective, I'll just educate the athlete about what taking it might mean. So taking it may be relatively safe, but this might not actually help with your performance, and maybe we want to be careful and run this by your coaches to make sure there's no banned substances on here. So again, we don't want to necessarily shut down the rapport we may have with an athlete when they're asking us about supplements. We want to just be able to have that conversation with them. We mentioned USP. That may be on some of our vitamin and mineral supplements, additional supplements as well. Again, usually this is a source of purity, a source of quality, although it still doesn't bring up to the same standards as being FDA approved would be. So any professional's role in recommending supplements would be to provide as much unbiased scientific information as possible. So this is what the research says. This is a dose that if we were to take, we might consider taking. And this is the safety of this supplement. We really don't want to ever recommend a supplement that we know is unsafe. That is the only time I will say you should not take this, is if it is unsafe, contradicted, or we know there's a banned substance in there that can make a player ineligible. Otherwise, we want to talk through with the athlete and help them decide what works for them and what can enhance their performance. We do want to be cautious of some conflicts of interest for those who sell supplements and are recommending supplements, because they may not be an unbiased source of information due to personal monetary gains. I know in the Code of Ethics for registered dietitians, we are not allowed to sell supplements because we would then not be an unbiased source. A good way to sum up how to talk about this information with athletes would be to guide but don't decide. So providing the information, telling them what would be appropriate for them, how they might achieve it, giving them other options. Instead of protein powder here, you may decide to, bring a sandwich to have after the gym. Or sandwich isn't convenient after the gym, sure, this protein powder can work for you. We want to help them guide, but we don't want to completely decide for them because they may feel shut down or not listened to or might lose the rapport. With our athletes, we want to make sure they trust us, that we're going to be honest with them, and that they can continue to come and ask us questions about these things. One of my favorite quotes is that relying on supplements to improve performance does not replace a regularly consumed healthy diet. As in everything we've taught in this course, baseline, we need to eat what our body needs for fuel. If we aren't doing that, then we are at risk for vitamin and mineral deficiencies. We're at risk for injury. We're at risk for being immunocompromised. There can be so many other things, and taking supplements to replace a regularly consumed healthy diet is not going to do it. So, in total, what we, again, want to think about is the supplement in question, what we know about it, what the research says about it, and how we communicate that information to our athletes. We can create an arsenal of supplements that athletes constantly ask us about, and we can create handouts if we'd like for them to educate them. But oftentimes, usually on a one-on-one basis, athletes might come and ask us. And again, we want to make sure that they are running these supplements by their sports dietitian or their compliance officer or whoever it might be if they're on an organized team or if they're competing, to make sure, again, that nothing is banned and they aren't disqualified. That's one of the most important things. So, with all that said, I appreciate you guys listening to this lecture online, and I will be available to answer any questions you have about this material, about fat, about vitamins, minerals, hydration, any of those topics that will be on our exam for Tuesday from 5 to 6:15 as our schedule says. So just reach out to me. I will be, again, on Blackboard, or go ahead and